Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 2 of Housing, a Gothic Tale, the partnership between the Welcome Home Atlanta team with Keller Williams and Aurora Theatre related to their production of Feeding Beatrice by Kirsten Greenidge. And today we have 2 incredible guests that are joining the conversation and actually making it a conversation. So Absolutely. It's just not you and I, talking heads. We have the incredible Kanika White with us, who is an agent with Keller Williams in both Knoxville and Atlanta. And we have Skylar Jackson, who some of you may know, is on staff at Aurora in the development department, but she's also serving as the dramaturg for Feeding Beatrice. So they'll both be able to give us some lovely insight. Kanika, could you just tell us a little bit about who you are and a little bit about your experience?
Yeah. Well, I'm originally from New Orleans, and I moved to Atlanta after Hurricane Katrina, but I grew up in both, Louisiana and Georgia, Atlanta, all my life. And then about 7 years ago, I moved to Knoxville. My job at the time, they asked me to come to Knoxville to manage some properties. And I was getting, I did what they asked me to do. I got the properties operating efficiently. I was getting bored, and I was like, listen, I'm ready to get out of Knoxville. This is country town. I need to get back to Atlanta. So I was getting really bored. And they were like, listen, how about we just pay for you to get your realtor's license, your real estate license? And I was like, okay, if you're going to pay for it, sure. And so they did that. And that's how I ended up becoming a real estate agent. But I've been in the housing industry going on 20 years now. I've had my license for 3 years, but I really, really just started delving into being an agent. It's been about a year now. So, and I find that I like it. And basically that's what I do.
That's fantastic. Yay. Yeah. Skylar?
Hello, like our previously stated, my name is Skylar Jackson. I serve as the dramaturg for this production, as well as the development manager and grants writer for Aurora. I too am from New Orleans. Yes. But I moved to Gwinnett County when I was about 5 years old. I've been in Gwinnett most of my life. I got my undergrad at Kennesaw State in theater, where I met Justin. He was my teacher all those years ago. And through a series of fortunate events, I landed here. During my time at Kennesaw, I spent a lot of time being a dramaturg for mainly Black works, because I found that there was a sense of, I didn't know much about Black plays when I first got into the program. I didn't know how in-depth it was. I didn't know too much about just the deepness that comes with Black theater and the telling of Black stories. So that's where my focus is on. And I'm honored to do yet another Black show, another Black focused show here at Aurora Theatre.
Fantastic. Well, we are so grateful to have the 2 of you joining us today. And really the scope of what we're looking at is trying to create a conversation between the play and between elements that are related to the housing market. So in our previous episode, Michael and I were taking a look at sort of the structural foundational history of what got us to where this play is. And today's focus is going to be about the state of affairs right now. Kanika, what we've been sharing with our viewers and patrons is we're kind of approaching this play like the 5 systems of a house. If you think of the foundation and a roof as the structure, that's looking sort of at the past, the framework of what got us here. And then electrical and plumbing is kind of the energy of what's flowing through a house. That's the lens that we're going to be looking at today. Like, what's the state of affairs today? What's the energy going on in the world today as it relates to housing? And then HVAC, which is, your control for heating and cooling. It's that climate control. It's that temperature gauge to hopefully help us forecast how we can achieve some degree of comfort in the future. So that'll be, forthcoming. So today we're looking at that current energy that's flowing through the housing sector right now, and just keeping it very focused on today. And there are a lot of things to discuss.
There are. So like Justin mentioned previously, we went through essentially as quickly as we could, history of the housing market and the housing industry. Now, Skylar, know you said in our last conversation that there were even some things in that you just didn't know about. What was something from that first segment that just kind of struck you or stood out to you?
I knew that that owning a house. So I am hopefully hoping to buy a house next year. Hopefully, let's see how life goes. And I guess because I've never really been taught how to buy a house.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a lot that goes into the process I didn't know. I knew the history of redlining. I didn't know about inside of the contracts how you know, you weren't allowed to sell your house to a Black person, a person of color, how they would, what was it? They would hire people to walk their babies through the neighborhoods and for people to blast music. And it just, the depth of it, because we're taught just the surface level of the systematic ways that we were prohibited from buying homes, but it didn't go down into how deep it really went. And to see the depth of the history and how deep it really goes really blew my mind. I love learning, but that was something I did not expect to get as a part of last week's episode.
Yeah, yeah.
So according to the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, it's the oldest Black-founded real estate advocacy group in the country. They release basically a state of affairs report every year. And their latest report indicates a gap between white ownership and Black ownership that really has not adjusted quite much, really since the early to mid 90s. And the gap right now is 40%. So it says that 71% of homeowners are white versus 31% that are Black. So we obviously explored why we've ended up with some of that disparity based on history. Mm-hmm. But what I would love to hear from you, Kanika, in terms of just your experience and even clients, consumers that you're talking with, and even what Skylar was mentioning, there is a huge education gap when it comes to purchasing a home. And honestly, I do think that runs across the spectrum. It's not just relegated to any particular community or marginalized group. But I will say that there are lots of myths out there that are not true. There's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of in access to particular information, if that makes sense. I would love to hear you just speak to that just a little bit in terms of what you are experiencing in your field and with your consumer base right now.
Well, I mean, it's very true that there's a lot of misinformation. A lot of people really don't understand how the home buying process works. And they really don't understand how that home is an asset and holds wealth for them and their families. Mm-hmm. And so I find that I'm having these conversations a lot with people. And you're right, Justin, it's not just with Black people or minorities, it's even white people. And I'll tell you, I was speaking with a potential client recently, and her family owns several pieces of property, several homes. And she was like, well, my parents told me once you get a piece of property, you never sell it, you never get rid of it. And I was like, I understand where that comes from. I know why, they would tell you that. And in a lot of cases, that's probably true, depending on that piece of real estate and the location of it. And, what your goals or needs are in terms of holding on to that asset. But it's just indicative of people understanding that there's wealth there, but not really knowing what that wealth is, how to extract it, how to use it, how to make it work for themselves to build more wealth and to gain more wealth. So the education piece is unfortunately really, really lacking. Like I said, I have conversations like this with people all the time, and it's just really teaching them how to navigate that whole process. And, letting them know that it doesn't just stop once you sign that paperwork at the closing table and get those keys. You have to have a plan for that asset. And the wealth is not just owning the house. That's not it's knowing what to do with the house. Where is that wealth? And helping them to figure that out and make that long-term plan to unlock the wealth and then use it.
Yes, I completely agree with that. I tell that to all of our clients, was like, getting to closing is just step one. Like that's when you start your journey. We tell our clients, like, you're stuck with us. We're here for the long haul. So just have how people have, financial advisors to manage their finances, right? We're still fairly new. Like I guess I can't say we're new anymore, but we entered into this about a year ago. And one of the things that was so interesting to me was it's like you help people and consumers buy this $250, maybe $500,000 asset, and then just say, okay, good luck. Like, have fun. You got it. You did it. Like, you did it. You're now a homeowner, right? And it's like, what? Like, how do I manage that? How do I handle that, right? And so to you, Skylar, right, knowing like that gap still exists today.
Yeah.
And looking back at June and Lori, who were having this experience, but in a completely different time period. What, just your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. One thing that Kanika, I listened to your interview, loved it. And you mentioned how, of course, don't sell grandma's house, but also you mentioned that to not buy the house in the house in the white community, but to keep that wealth in your community. And that really struck because in the play, June and Lori moved to an all-white neighborhood, and Leroy, who is Lori's brother, comes over and he says, like, you could have bought this house down the street. They just sold their house, lots of room for kids. Why didn't you go down there? Why didn't you go over there? And I've seen so many times that people, Black people, like to move out of the community because that's where they think that the good is. That's where the wealth is. If I go to the wealth, that's where I can go and live this dream life that I want to dream, instead of like the wealth can be in your own community, but we have to invest in our own community and to build that wealth there. And you did say, take your wealth with you. I wasn't really sure what that meant. I hope you could dive in a little more on what it means to take the wealth with you. That's just the job for me, guys. Sorry, I got questions.
Well, and very quickly,
Absolutely.
what Skylar is referring to is Kanika was featured in an interview with NPR at the end of December, and we'll make sure that that's linked on our resource page with both the print version and the audio version that you can dive into. But yes, if you can unpack that for us a little bit, Kanika, that would be great.
Yeah, so when I say take the wealth with you, what I'm saying is a lot of times in areas that's being gentrified, and we see that that's happening in cities across the nation right now, that a lot of these, areas that are predominantly Black, unfortunately, predominantly impoverished, they're being gentrified. And so, sometimes I get it. Like, you don't want to stay in this neighborhood. You do want to move out. I mean, you grew up, for lack of a better term, in the ghetto. And so you want to move to another area that's probably predominantly white because you want to feel like you made it. So I get it. And if you're going to let go of a house in an area like that, don't let it go for just pennies when it's worth so much.
Say that again, Kanika. Say that again.
That right there.
I just got a phone call literally 30 minutes before we got on this call or the Zoom call from one of those random people that never identify themselves, but say, hey, would you like to sell your house? Or getting those random postcards in the mail from no names. It's like randomly identified.
We buy cash.
We buy cash.
Like,
you know what I mean? But speak on it, because that's, I think, again, where there's a lot of informational gap between people who maybe they could potentially be in a desperate situation financially. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're just simply, they don't have enough information to really wrap their heads around making a decision. So they end up going with somebody who's dangling a carrot, not realizing that if they were to bring their house to market, right, as opposed to going through a private kind of investor sale, they may make 20 to 30% more on that sale.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's exactly the point. Like, get as much wealth out of your property as you possibly can, as opposed to leaving it for the investors to get that wealth. And there's so many ways on how you can get it. So if you were to sell your home and it's as is state, and they're offering you $30,000 or $40,000, and this is now like a hot area, it's an area that's being gentrified, you can probably get 60, 70, maybe even $100,000 for that same home without doing anything to it. I've done that. I cannot tell you how many times here in Knoxville for clients, and they're always shocked because to them, who would want this house? How could it be worth $80,000. I mean, I would take 20 for it. Like, I've had these conversations with people. And you know, in this other way. So if you want to you can be your own flipper. Like, you can be the flipper for your own house. And a lot of times the same thing that investors will come in and do, you can do yourself. You can get those finances to, you know, remodel that home, renovate it, and then sell it for the most money on the market. And potentially, depending on your circumstances, walk away from the table with tens of thousands of dollars, way more than you thought you could get previously. So it's just teaching people that whole process. Like, if you're going to sell this house, get your wealth. Absolutely. Don't just give it away.
And you mentioned something that I think is indicative to this process for anyone, is getting really good counsel. And I think aligning yourself with someone who is in it relationally, and is certainly going to help to prepare, protect, and advocate for you in the transaction, but is not simply going to, like we were saying earlier, it's going to, at closing, it's see you later.
Right.
I'm going to say with that, though, I think there comes a shared accountability and responsibility that everyone that holds the title of agent and or realtor has to own, right? Because there was so much mistrust previously in the past of exploitation and just kind of taking people for what they were worth and like turning around. Just in terms of consumer trust, the real estate industry, agents in general, rank lower than used car salesmen. That's how little people trust people who are supposed to be advocates for them, who are supposed to be that sound counsel, people who are supposed to be that fiduciary to make sure that they're protected throughout the entire transaction, right? So I think it's a little bit of owning the past and the history of the mistrust and the abuse of power and the abuse of information to essentially keep people out or to exploit them. And now it's, how do we go into these areas and educate and uplift and make sure that people know exactly what's going on, right? And I think it's one of those things, right? When, you know, we talk a lot about prospecting, right? Finding new business. And typically you're not going into predominantly Black areas to find new business because those home values aren't as much as the home values in the north side of the city or in this side of the city. So I think there's a little bit of onus and ownership that the profession, our profession collectively has to take it as well of, yes, consumers in predominantly Black areas and in these areas of the city where gentrification is happening are being taken advantage of. However, what are we doing to intersect and intercede to help solve that, to help mitigate that, right? Because even if a consumer just knew, oh, I could talk to a real estate agent to figure out what my home is actually worth, like that gap right there would just tremendously change the game, right? When they get a call or a letter in the mail from an investor that's like, hey, I'll pay you $20,000. And it's like, well, let me talk to an agent first, right? To have the minds or the wherewithal to be like, oh, well, let me get a second opinion from somebody else, right?
I think so many times when it comes to giving a second opinion or calling a real estate agent, the trust is like, oh, how do I know this person isn't going to rip me off? Or how much is it going to cost me for this person to come tell me about my house? Or when you see the difference between having a Black home appraised versus a white home appraised and how much distant difference that is. And so it's like, you know, do I need to like de-Black my house?
Well, exactly. And you bring up a really great point, Skylar, because we've seen multiple cases in just this past year, and it's happening all over. It's been featured all over different news platforms and different news cycles where that very thing has happened, where an appraiser has come in and undervalued the home of a Black family or Black couple. And then what they will do is they'll basically almost like reassign it in a way to a white family, sort of, like you said, de-Black the house, if that makes any sense. And the value comes back higher. And these people have taken these cases to court, which they absolutely should. Because the unfortunate thing, even when it comes to appraisers, and that's a whole nother thing that we can talk about, is while there is a degree of formulation when it comes to comp analysis and things of that nature, it is still done by a person. There's still a subjective quality. That's why you could literally have 3 appraisers, 5 appraisers, 10 appraisers come to a single property any given day,
you get a different
and you'll
value.
get a different value. And now, granted, ideally, it's probably within a relative range, but there's a lot of mitigating factors that are related to that.
And this, I think this goes back to part one, where we unpacked the fact that a lot of this, I don't know, this misconception that Black people are associated with lower property values was all fundamentally and systematically installed by federal housing policy, right? In terms of the FHA not wanting to insure home loans for Black Americans near white, suburbs, because it was going to affect the property values, and therefore Black people are now associated with property values and all of those different things. Like that through line and that notion, that mindset, that mentality still is carrying through even to today. Nika, what are your thoughts?
I mean, those are all valid points. I mean, it's something that we, in this industry have to face, and not just people in this industry, but our government as well on every level, federal, state, and local. We have to address that. And so I think that with gentrification happening, in so many cities, it is such a good opportunity for real estate agents and appraisers and even lenders and our government step in and say, you know what, we don't want those predominantly Black or predominantly white areas. What we want are integrated communities, communities that are integrated racially and economically. And when we put policies in place to ensure that, the same way they ensured that they would be segregated, we need to ensure that they would be integrated. And we have to make those steps to do that. And Justin, you were saying earlier that we really want to give people a different way of looking at this. And so I talk about mitigating gentrification by making sure that communities are integrated racially and economically. And the way, people can really look at that and not take it as, being forced to do anything that they don't want to do, is integration protects you and your assets for both Black people, white people, Hispanics, agents, anybody. Because when you have an area so what we know happens, unfortunately, is that if an area is predominantly Black, it will receive less resources. It's just a systematic thing. And one of the ways to tear that down is not to have areas that's predominantly Black or predominantly white. So when you have an integrated area, because the system prefers to, I don't know how to word this, but prefers to
prioritize or allocate resources.
Exactly. So these areas that are predominantly white, when you have an integrated community, that community would then receive those resources and protect the home values for everybody in that community. So for a white person who may be living in a predominantly white area, if for any reason they wanted to shift things, and we see this happen all the time where white communities they begin to decline, and I think a lot of that is systemic, and so they move to different areas, and then the racial makeup of those communities change. But you have people, even white people, who live in a community and they love it, like they love the area, they like everything around it, they don't want to change, they don't want to sell their house, but they see that home values are declining. It's the integration is a way for them to protect where they live as well. So if they want to stay there for the next 30 years, they don't have to worry about that shift happening and people putting certain things in play for that shift to happen. I can give a really quick example of something that happened just a few years ago in Knoxville. The area that I live in is predominantly Black. It's going through gentrification right now. And the same thing that Richard Rothstein talked about and taught us about, where they would change the racial makeup of communities by closing down certain schools in the Black community and pushing them to a certain area. That was literally on the table in Knoxville, to where they would close down the Black school and offer to bus those children to a completely different community, almost 30 minutes away, that's predominantly white. And of course, they didn't say this, but I mean, we know it was also that gentrification could really take place in this area. And one of the ways to do that is to move out the current residents. And you move out those current residents by taking things from that community that ground them there. So, I mean, it's just where things are done intentionally to to sort of kind of like disband communities. So when an area becomes hot, like it's where people want to be, and I mean, things change and it's just the natural course of things. It's really, it's not surprising and it's not shocking to me. It's probably disheartening that the conversation, I guess, in whatever rooms and at whatever tables are not, this area has been disenfranchised. It's lacking in resources. It needs, you know, to be stimulated economically. How do we incorporate people who are currently living there into what we want to do, into the plans for the future as we begin to develop this community? And instead, the conversation is the people who are currently there, we have to get them out so that the people who have money will want to live there. And it's just very, very disheartening to me that the wrong conversations, clearly based on decisions that's being made, are the wrong conversations are happening. And it's just, it's crazy that the idea is to further disenfranchise people instead of enfranchising people. And it's just, you know, I mean, it just has to be brought up. So like conversations like this are so important. And it's important that these conversations are being heard by the people who make these kinds of decisions, the people who are at these tables and who can say, you know what, I think we're having the wrong conversation. How can we make sure that whoever wants to live in this community has the ability to live in this community? So you can work here, you can play here, and you can live here, and you can afford it.
Yeah, and I think going off of that, I think one thing that is so powerful and impactful about that, right? When we talk about having these conversations, right? Typically, these conversations come up in, let's say, like like a board meeting or something. But the way, again, talking about what systems and what things are in place today that continue to further this, when you are in a community where you know the majority of the residents and the people that live in that community are not going to be able to come to a 2 o'clock board meeting to defend and fight for their city or to be able to allow their voice to be heard, right? Or, you know, so it's also little things like that, right? Which are sometimes intentionally done to keep that voice from being, it's like, well, we opened it up to the community, right? We allowed for there to be public discourse, and we brought it to the table, but you brought it to the table at a time when you knew no one could show up to actually let their voice be heard, right? So things like that, even as we talk about just present day, right? It's those little things that are barriers and obstacles that continue to perpetuate this, right? You pull all of these resources out, you know, so when I think I could go, this is my soapbox, I could go on for this for days.
Well, what you're speaking.
Speaking of what Kanika said about being able to afford it, we even see in the play where June is a banker and she used to be a dance teacher, but she had to give that up to go get this more better paying job so she can even afford this house. And her husband, Lurie, he worked for the newspaper and he's an editor. And even with this new wealth, June still needs to take on more shifts. They're still eating like bread and margarine. They can't afford to live in this house because it's taking everything from them.
Well, which leads me to believe, and again, we don't have the facts prior to the beginning of the play, that they were not represented well in the real estate transaction from an agent or even their lender.
And I don't think they had one at all.
Well, I mean, whether they did, more than likely they did. If they didn't, my heart breaks for them even more. But the fact that they were not set up well. And I think there is already from get-go this sense of being house poor immediately. And let's just be honest, if we're going to talk about condition of the home, how does an inspector not find human remains under tiles that have already been pulled up? I'm like, come on, y'all. But we don't know. Maybe they did purchase the house as is. Maybe there was a sensibility of who knows? Because I think what really the trigger for this and part of the whole bedrock is June is so determined for this to work and so determined to belong in this neighborhood that she has these blinders on, again, probably lacking really sound counsel, probably having a really great, cloud of witnesses and voices to say, you need to think about this. You should consider this. Let's press a little further. Let's make sure we get an inspection. Let's not give up your contingencies if we don't have to do that. Right. We're seeing like all this craziness today,
housing market.
Right. But I wonder if, who knows? I mean, that may not have been helpful for her. She may have been so far gone in terms of the way that she had metabolized her quote unquote need for this house. And what we're also forgetting too, and we don't have to get too far into this because it's kind of ancillary, but very important to her journey, is she's also going through a tremendous amount of grief. So going through that process, I think, is creating its own, blinder for her, in that I need something to hold on to, something that's going to give me stability, perhaps identity. And I will literally go to whatever lengths possible to save thing, because I couldn't save my child, right? But I can save this house. And I can save at whatever cost, right? So it's like, you took one thing from me, world, universe, God, whatever, nothing will be taken away from me again.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point, Justin, about she probably didn't have sound counsel, which is so just, disappointing, because sound counsel really could have gotten her not just that house, but the money to make the necessary repairs and make it what they want it to be. There's so many products out there for that. And even just counsel and planning for the long term. So I'll tell you, I have buyers now. Y'all know how it goes. So you have a buyer, they have a budget of $200,000 and they want, the whole house to be renovated, granite countertops, hardwood floors, a whole shebang. And they want it in the best neighborhood, right? And so they just simply can't afford it. So what I tell some of my buyers is, listen, you can buy a house that's not at the top of the market, that do not have those upgrades, but it's livable. You can move in, it's move-in ready. And as home prices increase in value, which they will, you can use the equity, you can pull the equity out and make those renovations yourself, and then further increase the value of your home, which means you now have even more wealth. You keep that wealth.
Exactly.
You can create your own wealth, as opposed to buying a house at the very top of the market or even over the market and having no wealth at all in it starting out. So just those different options, and having that sound counsel on how to use real estate to have wealth and to enjoy what you have and not be house poor.
Well, I think a great thing to bring back up and to highlight is the fact that one of the first things that we mentioned in that segregated by design section, right, is the fact that essentially the housing market we're seeing today was always the case for Black individuals, because there was such a small, limited supply of inventory for Black homeowners that the prices could be exorbitant, right? And just could be over the top, right? And like we're seeing today, people would do anything to get a home and are willing to give their last to have the dream of home ownership or try to obtain that, right? So I think also looking at the fact that because of the segregation and because we had these, you can only buy here, you can't buy here, that shrunk the inventory to such a level that the desperation was so high that they were willing to go above and beyond, stretched way past their means to be able to live in this house. And I would love to know, Skylar, Justin, whoever, I would love to know a little bit more about June's thoughts around this home being perfect. She just had this idea that this home was perfect.
Speaking of Skylar.
She was so like as reading the play, she was so determined and just so like ingrained in like, this is my house, especially when Beatrice comes out, and Beatrice is like, if you want to keep this home, you have to do everything I say. You have to follow my rules. You have to do everything I want you to do. And like, she's has to repeat herself, this is my house, this is my house, this is my house. And we see her fighting to be able to have the adoption agency come up so she can get this child. We see her moving away from her friends and family, and then being hurt to be like, why didn't they come to this side to celebrate me and to celebrate this, when she could have gotten a house in the neighborhood that was available to her. These houses down the street that were just as big, just as nice, but they're not in this side of town. And she's trying to get this house perfect today. Yeah. Like we have to call the plumber. Oh, we have to get this fixed. Oh, we have to do this. And her husband is literally like, we don't have the money to do all that. We can do it one bed at a time. And she's like, I need this now. And I think it also has to do with her grief with like, I can't sit in this grief anymore. I can't sit in this mentality. I have to have something that is complete and perfect and whole in my life, because this house is the only thing I have to have this, because this house is the answer to the rest of my life being like set. And as a millennial, I see that so many times with my own peers. Like, if I just get a house, like I can get everything else in order. Like I can, like, I got the job already. I have like a couple of savings. If I just get a house, I'm completely on my own. I don't have to, worry about anything else anymore. Like the house is the creme de la creme. That's like the American dream that I want to be whole, to be fully adult, to be fully there, to make it.
Could we unpack that just a little bit? Because
I was going to say the same thing.
I think what we're really talking about and kind of skirting around is I would call it cultural exploitation. And there's probably other ways to define it, but I think we're experiencing that through June's journey. And as it relates to this myth, this metaphor of the American dream, like, what is it? Is it actually a thing? Is it all how like wound in or tied up is homeownership in that? And is it truly available for everyone?
And I would even add, like, not only is home ownership the goal, it's a type of home the goal. Because if I get a house that's run down, hey, I'm a homeowner, but look at your house. Like, some people scoff at that. But if I get a house in a really nice neighborhood that's really nice with the granite counters and all the new amenities, but I'm house poor, is that the dream?
Right.
And what do you think, and this is a blanket question for everything, what do you think is the motor that drives that desire? Like, why do we feel that like I need that one? Like you were saying, it's not just I'm a homeowner. It's I need to be in that house. What is, because I feel like unpacking that, we'll start to see the thread of, some of the other things that are at play.
Do you have any experiences, Kanika, that you can speak into as it relates to that?
Yeah, I do actually.
Client, but
Yeah. So, I hate to keep taking it back to Knoxville, but whenever I'm having these conversations, I really, really like to use real life current examples. Because a lot of times people would think, that was in the past. It's like, no, it's happening right now.
This was last week.
Right. So, in the areas that's being gentrified right now, I have, I know people, friends and clients and whatever else who are in the market to buy a home, but they do not want to buy in what used to be, but quickly changing, the predominantly Black area. The area that had very little resources, but now is getting a lot of resources. And they know that, like, they have these conversations about, gentrification, how horrible it is, and how, people need to stop it and stuff like this. But it's like, you're in the market to buy a home and you don't want to buy a home in the area that's being gentrified. You want to buy a home that's, out west or further east, that's in the areas that's predominantly white. And I think it's because it's that sense of, I made it. Like, I made it out of the hood. I made it out of the ghetto. And when you have a certain type of house, it looks more like success. So like Skylar was saying, you can buy a house that's sort of kind of run down, but it's like, okay, well, anybody can get that. Nobody really wants them anyway. But when you have something that is, it's nice, it's beautiful, it has, the marble, the hardwood floors, it has tile, backsplash, and all that good kind of stuff, it looks more like success. It looks more like you have the money and you can afford it. And I think people go that route. And it's just really unfortunate. And, as a realtor, I can't stare anybody.
Of course.
But what I can do is have these conversations and say, listen, we're going to get you, I'm going to do everything I can to get you exactly what you want, where you want, the neighborhood that you feel like is perfect for you and your family. But let's talk about what your long-term goals are as far as home ownership and wealth building. And so we, I just go through the process and lay everything out for them. So in certain areas, you might be buying in an area that's really at the top of the market. You're not going to accrue that much equity over the next 5 or 10 years because it's pretty much there. Yeah. But you have areas that's still growing and developing where you can get a house now that's valued at $250, and we see how quickly homes
Absolutely.
Home values are increasing. And this same square footage home, same type of amenities and upgrades exist in this home, this certain community that you can get for $250, and in 3 years, it'll be worth $350,000 or more. That's wealth building. Agreed. So if your goal is not just to have home ownership, but to also build wealth for you and your family, you have to consider that and make a decision that's in line with your goals. So I have that conversation with people. Of course, they have to choose what they want to choose, but it's just really about getting really down deep with home buyers and having those conversations. And I tell you, I don't just have those conversations with Black people, but white people as well, who don't come from wealth. Mm-hmm. Their families, didn't provide them with, money, the down payment for their first home. And so, they need these kinds of conversations as well. People who lack financial means. And, of course, you have a larger population of minorities who are in that position, in that circumstance. But this conversation is really across the board so that people can make more informed decisions for themselves and their families when they are looking to build that wealth. Yes. Now, if you just like the community and you just love it, then okay, wealth building is not your goal. I mean, you might already have this, and fine. Sure. But it just really depends on what those goals are.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, we have that conversation all the time with our clients. We really make sure we're like, is this a 1 to 3? Is this a 3 to 5? Is this a 5 to 7? Like, where is this in your journey, and what are you envisioning for this first home, Mr. and Mrs. first time home buyer, right? What is your dream? Like, what does this need to do for you to align with your long-term goals, right? And we want to make sure, and also, what is the lifestyle that you are hoping to have? And what is the community that you're trying to build? Like, all of those facets, right? Because just like June, she got into this home and was throwing this party and wanted all the people to come to this party, right? And so
nobody came.
And nobody came.
No, but also there was no effort. Like, we don't see any legitimate effort to build community or to even reach out and establish relationship. And I think some of that is probably perception, but also participation.
Well, I think it's a little bit of the if I build it, they will come kind of thing, right?
Yes. Put her everything in the house. Right. Like, if I do this, if I get this house perfect, everyone's gonna want to come over because I have this big, beautiful house in this nice neighborhood. Not like, oh, let me call so-and-so and make sure they're coming. Let me call so-and-so. I don't have time to call people because I got to go get this house together. I got to go clean this. I got to go change this. I got to go fix this. So,
I was missing the forest for the trees because I wasn't considering relationship. I was considering the thing.
Yeah.
The thing was more important than the people. And probably vice versa. And that's, I think, the beautiful tension of the play is that you're wrestling, the past is wrestling the present. It's literally, and what's beautiful is there's so many dance sequences that are happening throughout the piece. It literally is a dance between past and present for all of these characters for the entirety of the play. And it's not a finger pointing. It's not a blame game. It's no, here's literally what has unfolded. How do we now in the present take responsibility for those things, pull that into our present moment, help to address what's going on here, and then also future cast that so that this kind of stuff doesn't happen again. And that people are set up for success, that they are fully aware and educated, they're super well counseled, that there is what we were speaking to earlier, Kanika, that whole idea of integration. It's not even just that, it's like the larger lens, how to create communities of belonging for everybody. Because
when you're done, I can wait.
But that's
jump on in.
I mean, you are touching on something that is so important and so right now in the moment. So when we're talking about the energy of how we got to where we are and what's going on currently, another really good example that's happening in Nashville as we speak is that in the same community that's being gentrified, it's just one of them, but it is a community that is predominantly Black, and it's a whole story on how this particular area became predominantly Black and poor. And it goes back to everything that Richard Rothstein teaches in his book.
Yep.
But in this particular area that is being gentrified, they are bringing a very, very wealthy businessman. He is bringing his minor league baseball team to this particular community, right? And so that's millions. It's somewhere in the number of like $201 million or something for this development. And so we know what happens, right? So when you have a development like that, money is being poured into a community, and it's not public funds. This is private money from him and investors, but it's going to generate more development and more growth, which means that prices all around and housing and everything else will go up. Right. And so people who live here now at some point will no longer be able to afford to live here or shop here or open up businesses here and, lease these commercial spaces. And so that's one of the main ways people get pushed out. Property taxes will increase. And so once property taxes increase, people who could once afford to pay those property taxes won't be able to pay it anymore. They'll get pushed out that way. So of course, there's a lot of pushback from the community on that. And when we're talking about right now, ways to look at this issue so that we can fix it at some point, unfortunately, the solution to sort of kind of assuage the community was to take this baseball field that, is used for like the little league baseball kids and stuff, and I can't even remember how much money this particular entrepreneur dedicated to it, but to rebuild that baseball field. And to create like a little league softball team. And it's just mind-blowing to me because that is not addressing the issue. That is not going to enfranchise people, help them, get them in a position economically and politically and socially, empower them to remain in this community. So that same amount of money that's being put into creating this little league softball team, and there are already little league softball teams. We don't need a new one. That money could have been put into homes that are in the area that's still dilapidated, infill housing, and building these homes using minority contractors and dedicating those homes for low-income families and minority families. And so it's just, instead of the decision being made to do that, the decision was to do what I call like a turkey basket program.
It's yes.
Like giving people fish instead of teaching them how to fish.
How to fish. It's performative.
Right.
It's really performative. And I honestly, I've been thinking a lot about this, especially with all of so we have an area in Atlanta, Bankhead, which is still very much right now, primarily predominantly Black. For the longest time, and had this stigma because you'd hear it in all the rap songs, like it was like that was the hood, like that's where the Black people live. Like we don't go to Bankhead. Now, drove through it the other day. There are $600,000 townhomes being built in this community.
Because and it's starting at the heart of the city and extending down back towards 20.
Right, and the thing is, they've poured all this money into building the new West Side Park. Beautiful, love it, great, wonderful. But like you're saying, right? So now all this money has been poured in. Now we need to build up all the development around it. Now we're pushing people out. It's like, okay, is there a way for like if you're coming in to develop XYZ percentage or this, you need to allocate XYZ to go to a community trust to offset property taxes for residents who do not want to leave, or like you're saying, going to just up the maintenance or the upkeep of some of the dilapidated houses, which are only that way because all the resources got pulled out in the first place, right? So the roads, the streets, the lights, all of that stuff were never serviced because the resources got pulled out. So if that's the case, then go ahead and pump that money back in and update the infrastructure.
Yeah.
There's a resource that I'll put in on a resource page. There's a program like that that's happening in Detroit right now. And I was born in Detroit, so I have a very, just endearing heartbeat for the city. And so I don't want to get off the rails, but in terms of somebody who is individually trying to address some of those issues,
It's called Black Women Build.
it's so great. Partnering with people that are literally she's identifying women who are going to be first-time home buyers, and they basically, it's not quite Habitat for Humanity, but they partner with them, learn a bunch of construction skills to pour into the house, and figure out an affordable pathway for them to own it. And they're doing it in chunks, like city blocks, which is just beautiful. Because if you've driven through Detroit, and really a lot of urban areas around the country, you do have those areas that they're just dilapidated or abandoned or falling down. But also what you're speaking to, Kanika, is let's be honest, it's like when they changed the name of Uncle Ben's Rice, like what was, you know what I mean? It's like that did what for what? Anyways, but we have similar situations down here. The big sort of both exciting thing and also thorn in a lot of people's flesh down here is the Beltline in Atlanta. And there has been so much rhetoric and promise for affordable housing, and it has still yet to really materialize as a priority. We were going to build all of this other infrastructure first, the pathways and the retail and the businesses and all these other townhomes and detached homes that are gregarious in terms of price as it relates to some of these other areas that the pathway is going through. And to me, it still seems like an afterthought.
Yeah.
That we're going to build this other thing and then band-aid it up. And I think it really, it's counterintuitive, because if that's not integral to the plan to begin with, it's always going to fall away, because the truth is that in and of itself is never going to be your economic generator.
Right.
And that's the one too, that, as we were speaking earlier, Kanika, you were talking about policy. One thing that rings for me very deeply is policy is people. And I think we forget that a lot. We can disassociate this idea of, well, here's the policy or the framework or the law or whatever. No, what you're talking about is people and how it affects people. It's enacted by someone or a group of people that is for people, and it's affecting people, right? So the whole tenet of policy being of and for people has to be maintained and geared towards the benefit of as many as possible. So that's relating to, specifically the Beltline here. We also, Turner Field, what used to be Turner Field, which is now owned by Georgia State, and they've turned it into, their facilities, and moving the Braves up to Cobb County, which was annexed by Atlanta, because the dynamic or the concentric mass of fans were in that area that's less than 10 miles from where it was currently housed. And now all of these things that were that had been promised when Turner Field was in operation, all of this money that was supposed to be pouring back into the surrounding areas, it never happened. What has happened now since the sale occurred and the stadium moved out to Cobb County and all of that development happened up? Now we have Summer Hill. We have all these beautiful shops and townhomes and everything that have sprung up around Turner Field, which should have been generated during that time when the Braves were in residence there. So you can call it what you want. You can say, oh, well, we're moving it because the mass of our patron base is 10 miles up. No, it's all a bottom line issue, right? And so for whatever reason, it was determined that it was not a viable area, or even just a want. Maybe it's not even something that people wanted to do, to follow through on whatever kind of promises or investments were earmarked for that neighborhood, and we're going to shuffle them somewhere else. And so when that property level has dropped because the Braves have left, well, now we've just it's become a feeding frenzy for investors to come in and gobble up the property. And now they're reaping the benefits that those community members could and should have reaped years ago.
Yeah.
One more thing. In talking about property taxes, I think there's a misnomer that people have of, oh, well, if you own your house, well, how could you be pushed out? The thing is, we have so many homeowners that are of a certain age that are on fixed income. They're not independently wealthy. They just happen to be homeowners because they've lived long enough to pay off their mortgage, right? In terms of owning the house outright. It doesn't mean that they're getting an exorbitant amount of income. So when you're living on a fixed income, and my mother deals with this, she's in just outside of Richmond in Virginia. Any little increase in her escrow is seismic for her. $15, $20, $30. That's gas. That's groceries. And if that starts stacking up in not even just incremental ways, but exponential ways, then you do end up with people that are in a financial crisis and then fall prey to people who give you that call and say, hey, have you thought about selling your house?
Yeah. And I think that this really and truly is identifying what the crux, the root of this problem is. And it is the same root that was here 60, 70 years ago when blatant redlining and blockbusting was happening. This is intentional segregation. It's really what it is. And I say that because people know how to solve this problem.
Right.
So, and I say all the time that the same thing that governments did for white people back in the early 1900s, for them to acquire homes and, you know, have that, be able to have that American dream that Scholar was talking about, it's really the same thing that they can do today to help minorities have that same dream and live that same dream out. And so the fact is that they are intentionally not making those decisions, not putting those policies in place. It's still intentional discrimination and segregation. It's just with a mask over the face of it. And, you know, again, these conversations are so crucial for us to be having and to be, you know, getting them in the hearing of people, the right people, who I think a lot of times they get to a table with the best intentions, but the current of that system, that energy is so strong that it's very difficult. It's like trying to turn around a, what do you call those big boats in the ocean?
Like a cruise, like a yacht.
Or a tanker.
Whatever got stuck in the canal, whatever got stuck.
The one where my shipping from Amazon is on right now.
It takes a lot to turn those ocean liners, those ocean liners around. It takes a really, really long time and a lot of energy to do that. And so people just get sort of kind of swept up in that current of the system. And it's just really, really unfortunate. And really the only way, well, not the only way, one of the best ways to turn that around is through these conversations that we're having.
Well, we are getting to a point where we should probably wrap up. I literally feel like I could hang out with the two of you all.
Absolutely. We could keep going.
But we know that we've got, Kanika probably has clients she needs to get back to. We have clients we need to get back to. Skylar, you're running a theater, so, you know. But do either of you just have any parting thoughts or anything that either hasn't been said or you would love to remind folks of? And we'll wrap it up. Why would it be important for somebody who is an agent, a broker, a lender, a closing attorney, anybody who's working in the real estate or the housing sector? Why would it be important for them to see this play?
I think it would be important for anyone working in the housing industry to see this play, because to see June and Lori go through this when it was, in most cases, avoidable. They didn't have to be in this house poor position. They could have had better counsel. They could have made better decisions. Just to see that this is a reality for a lot of people, because this is set in modern time. This is set in today's time. And to see that this is reality for people, you know, not getting haunted by a white girl in your bathroom. But the housing, the reality that this is reality for a lot of people, that home ownership is not easy for everyone. It isn't something that just, oh, here you go buy a house and go be happy and live this perfect dream that you put all this thing into this house. This is a reality. I think it needs a lot more awareness, and people need to see that this is really happening out here.
And while you may not be haunted by an actual ghost, there's plenty of other things in the psyche and in, you know, past trauma that can continue to haunt you. Kanika,
or you could be haunted by a ghost. You never know.
You could. I mean, you could. So, where's the sage?
Right.
Any final thoughts, Kanika?
Just going back to what Skylar was saying, and, you know, when you're looking to buy a home, seek good sound counsel from somebody who really will have your best interest at heart, and ask all the right questions, and know what your goal is in buying that home. So do you just want to roof over your head, or do you want to use that real estate as a wealth building vehicle? Know what your goal is, and based on your goal, ask that professional the right questions so that you can make sure they're steering you towards your goal and not putting you in a position to where it'll be difficult to achieve your goal.
Love it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yay.
Yes, this was great. Truly, I enjoyed this so much. Kanika, thank you so much. Skylar, thank you so much. It was a pleasure getting to speak with both of you. I know we could do this forever. So.
All right, we will release you back to your lives, and we will make sure that all of the resources that we've talked about today are on our resource landing page, along with links to get tickets for the show and additional information. We're also going to make sure that we link to Kanika's information if you want to reach out to her, or maybe you have someone in Knoxville who's looking for a home, or even here in the Atlanta area. We would love to partner with you on some relational transactions as well. But until next episode, we will see you later, friends. From the Welcome Home Atlanta team, we're Michael and Justin. Thank you so much for Aurora Theatre for this opportunity, and we'll see you at the theater.